I want to discuss a number of strategies for when you're going to look for your first software engineering job, whether you just graduated college or you just finished a boot camp and are now going to be placed in a company for either a contract or a full time position, whatever it may be. There's a couple different things that you can do to help you set yourself apart from the other pool of candidates that are going to be applying to the jobs. And it's no mystery that the job market currently is not exactly the greatest. There's a lot of applicants for each job that are posted. We're seeing a lot less junior jobs being honestly just being posted or even created. And when we do see these junior jobs, the experience is that of a mid-level developer at least. And so it's quite complicated, honestly, to even break into this profession anymore, just because of the state of both the economy and just honestly the job market at large. And I just don't see it improving in the near future, but we'll have to see. But a couple things you can do are you definitely want to make sure that you have a personal website. And that can be in the form of a personal portfolio website or some form of website to showcase the projects that you've worked on. And these projects don't have to be just like side projects. They can be projects that you worked on in school, whatever. Maybe you were in a programming class and you made a small application or you made a system or a database. You can take that and then put it on your website just to show like what experience that you've worked on. And a lot of this is not so much about the functionality of the application, so much it is about the like semantics of how you are explaining the application. And you want to make sure that the language around your app makes sense. How are you talking about it? What value does the application bring? Because at the end of the day, software engineering is about adding value. And you have to make sure that you're explaining how whatever you made is adding value in whatever context it is. And that's what people want to hear. So if you made a console application that, let's say, automated something in Excel, you don't want to just stop after you explain the technicalities of the application, right? You don't want to just say that you made a console app that could automate input into an Excel file, because that doesn't show like what the value is. You want to take it a step further and say that this, using this console application that I made, you can save 6 hours per week, by running this and automating, data entry or something like that. So you want to quantify it some way, whether that's in hours, money, dollars, whatever it is. You want to quantify it. So you want to quantify the value for whatever your project is. And that's very important. But sometimes it's hard to articulate the value, right? It's hard to get that point across in a succinct sentence, because you want to limit yourself to about a bullet point sentence, because that's both going to be on your resume, and also it's about the length that somebody's going to read on your site, right? Because people are going to be scrolling and they're going to skim past that panel that shows like the project and your write up about it. So you want to make sure that you kind of craft that in a way where it gets your point across and it articulates the value that it added. And on your website, I would suggest you add both a picture of what your application looks like, and also on the right hand side or left hand side, somewhere next to that picture, you have the bullet point write up about what it is. And it may also be good to list all the technologies used. You don't have to explain them at all. You just want to list them in some way where it gets the keywords across. So if you wrote it in C Sharp, .NET, React, use Docker, you want to list all those keywords just in some kind of list. It can just be a common delimited list on the bullet point, but something just to get it across quickly that you use these technologies to add this value. So I think that's very important. Another thing that you can do is create something that can be downloaded by an end user. So when you're going about and applying to all these different positions or jobs, if you have something that somebody who is looking at your information can then go and download to verify that you worked on this, it just adds a level of credibility to what you're talking about, because it takes it from just being on paper. Now it's something that they can get in the App Store, or it's something that they can download as a plugin or an extension for Chrome, or something that they can go and download to show that you're going out and trying to deploy your software and distribute it. Because that's like half the battle in software engineering, is how you're going about deploying, what it is you're actually making, right? How are you distributing the value to people? So that's just something that, if you have to take another step to do that, I would strongly consider taking some time to do that. Again, it doesn't have to be the latest and greatest thing, but it's just something that it may help you if it is out there and people can download it. For me, this looked like an iOS application. It's not even in the store anymore, but I had a couple apps that I think helped me to get my first job. And I know it was a talking point in an interview, so it may, whatever you can do really to bring up more talking points about your programming is going to help you in the long run, right? It's going to give you experience, but on the other side of the coin, it's going to give you talking points in the interview, which is what you want, right? You want to be able to talk through what it is you've made. So your personal project website or portfolio website, and you don't even have to make this from scratch, right? Because if it takes you, if you're not trying to go into web development, you don't want to waste a bunch of time making a website. So I made mine in Wix. You can use Squarespace, you can use whatever you want. So just have something out there and then just buy a domain and then have it, be accessible. And then you want to make a distributed application, whether it's an extension or an application. So both of those things are going to help you out. Another thing is going to be practicing interviews and also practicing how you're talking about technology and how you're talking about systems, right? Because I think it's unfortunate, but the interview is such an important step, and a lot of it really does come down to semantics and how you articulate, understanding how you go about solving a problem, but what are the steps that you do to try to solve that problem. And the only way to really get good at this is just to practice. There's some sites that you can go and practice, like mock interviews. You can do that, but if they're not free, I would then try to just sit down in front of a camera and film, record yourself talking through your projects and talking through the skills that because I think when you go and watch that back, you're going to identify gaps in your understanding and also gaps in, where, it might not be making sense in terms of the concepts that you're trying to explain. So you might be able to take notes on yourself explaining these things, write it down, and then go back and then do it again and fill in the gaps and just keep doing this. And I would honestly do this over the series of a few months. And during these few months, I think it's very important that you spend time reading very select books that go along with the technologies that you're trying to get a job in, right? Because if you read books, I think it's going to unlock a level of understanding and knowledge that you're not going to get if you just read documentation, because a lot of what comes with books is explanation of best practices. And if you can add best practices into your explanation of the technologies, I think that's really going to help you not only to explain the concept or point you're trying to talk through, but it's going to force you to think about the technology in the context of a system and in the context of adding value, right? Because if you're trying to explain a very obscure and abstract concept, it's anyone can go and just memorize the definition, but if you can take the definition and then explain how you put it into practice, what are some common pitfalls that you may run into, what are some common errors, how do you handle the errors, and just let the conversation kind of flow based on what you know and based on the best practices that I think it's really, really going to help you. But I think the only way to truly get there is to practice. So honestly, the best way I can think of is just doing something like this, is just recording yourself talking about it and getting feedback on it from other people, and then just watching it yourself and taking notes on what you do. and then keep going. It's really no different than giving a presentation for school, right? Like over the course of weeks or months, you prepare, you practice the presentation, you change the presentation as needed, you work on your notes, you work on your presentation skills, and it's no different than interviewing. Interviewing is just another skill in the job, right? It's a series of explanations, uh, presentations, working through problems, and coding. And if you can get those things squared away, I think it's just going to help you a lot, because the last thing you want to have happen is do bad at an interview just because you're unable to talk through a really complex point. I think it's unfortunate, but the way that this system is set up, the world is set up, is that it requires people to be able to discuss things well and to communicate ideas well. And you can be the greatest programmer ever. You can understand at such a deep level, technical concepts and programming language nuances and everything like that. You can understand computers inside and out. But if you can't explain it, if you can't communicate that well, then I think it's going to be a hindrance to you trying to get a job and trying to advance in your career. So I would just really, honestly, this might be the biggest one, but I would seriously sit down today and just start thinking about this and start practicing, because I think this is one of the things that's going to set you apart in the long run, especially if you're trying to get your first job. Again, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of books about the interview process. So whether you're just trying to stick with understanding algorithms or practice programming problems, I would still do those, but I would couple that with the interview practice books, or just again practicing interviews by recording yourself. Another thing that I would try to focus on, in addition to what we've talked about now, is making sure that you can explain a specialized technology pretty well, and explain more of like a niche kind of subcategory of programming. And what I mean by this is that, you can understand a language like C sharp, you can understand that well, and you can, talk about when you may not use a feature of the language, and best practices of the language, what frameworks you can use to build an API, to build a website, to build whatever. You can explain all that, and I think that's coming to be the expectation even for junior jobs. But I think that if you spend maybe a month or two just trying to learn more of a niche technology, I always give the example on this channel of learning queues. I really think that that's going to set you apart in the interview, because I think once you delve into more of a niche technology, and that can be queues, like we've talked at length on this channel about, that can be Docker, that can be debugging, anything like that. Just pick a specialization that you think you are going to want to go into, and try to tie that into the conversation, because I think you're going to be surprised at how much that opens up different doors, and how much that opens up the conversation to go in a way that you may not have thought it would have. And I think that it's important that you understand that they're interviewing you, but you are also interviewing them. You really are. And I wish I had learned this earlier on, but you want to make sure that you are comfortable with the technology being used there, but also you want to make sure that you are seeing what their thought processes are. And I think that's just important, as them hearing what your thought processes are. So when you start to articulate something about a more of a niche or a subcategory of a technology like queues, I think you'll be surprised at how that can steer the conversation very quickly into more of a technically minded conversation that you can then flesh out more of the information that but also it opens the door to ask questions about more of the things that you may be working on, and how the team goes about working on things, and what does it look like for planning, and all these very important things that I think you should be asking about in an interview. I think it creates that conversation a little bit more organically, when you start to just get there by way of just natural conversation brought up by your interest in a specialized technology. Um, Lastly, I think that just again, just to comment on the current job market, it's becoming quite difficult to land, unfortunately, land a junior job. It seems like there's just so many people applying to these junior jobs, and I don't know if it's just people wanting um, a more laid back atmosphere, if it's just remote, whatever it is. I think that the the requirements, unfortunately, are just kind of broadening in scope in terms of what the job is requiring. And I wish it wasn't like that, but it's just the reality. And I think that if we begin to accept what the reality is, we're going to realize that the expectation is that we have some knowledge of some form of cloud technology or cloud service. So AWS is a prime example. So if you have just kind of some tertiary knowledge of AWS services, you don't even have to have that much knowledge about obviously the whole breadth of services, because that's basically impossible unless you actually like have worked in it for a couple of years. But if you pick a couple services, like AWS S3 buckets are a big topic that you can kind of delve into. You can then go into AWS and some of their hosting options, whether that's on an EC2, or whether you start to dive into cloud hosted databases, networking, and there's just so many topics. But I think if you just select a couple and are just able to express a baseline understanding of them, I think it's going to help you. And I understand that, this sounds like you basically just have to know everything, but I think I'm just trying to be as close to, reality as possible. And reality currently is basically having knowledge and understanding of a lot of these topics. It's that is a big problem in today's job economy, is that the amount of knowledge that you have to have as a junior developer just keeps increasing by the year, to the point where a junior developer, I would argue, it was a mid developer was where a mid developer was at just a few years ago. And when we see junior developer jobs requiring years of experience and leadership experience, and just all this crazy stuff, it's like it begs the question, obviously, like how do you get there if this is the first job that you have? Especially, how do you get there without multiple years of like internship experience if you didn't have that? It just is an interesting kind of thing that's happening. But again, if we stick to what reality is, unfortunately, you're just going to have to learn as much as you can and have an understanding of a lot of these technologies. Um, if you can, I would try to tie in some of this as much as you can into your personal project. Again, it doesn't need to be anything groundbreaking, but it just needs to show some basic understanding of some of these technologies, whatever you choose to work on. Um, I think that's just going to help you out. I think it's just going to help you give. I think it's going to help you out in terms of setting yourself apart. Um, but it's better. It's better than not doing any of that. And I'm sure that I'm sure some people have not done any of that and gotten a job like on the second application, right? I'm sure that still exists, but I know for me that was not my experience. It took months and months, and I, I've sent probably about 20, 30, 40 applications. I can't even remember out, and I only heard back from a few. So that was my experience, and that was back in 2019. And I think it's only gotten worse now. So, I would try to do as much as you can beforehand. Um, so if you have time, I would seriously try to study and work on what we talked about in this video. Um, Let me know your thoughts though, because I think that there's more than one way to prepare and go about this. So if you know of any other ideas or can think of anything else, let me know. So, anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.